Hey folks, David Stewart here. Today we're going to be talking about planned obsolescence, which I briefly mentioned in some other content, and we've talked about a little bit in the comments and elsewhere. Here's the big idea of planned obsolescence. This is when a company basically plans in some sort of way to make their product obsolete so that you have to buy a new one. The consumer has to buy a new product and can't continue using the old product. Now I'm going to attack this from a couple of different angles and give some, probably the best counterpoint that I can really give to the arguments regarding planned obsolescence, which have originated in the comments. Now I can't look up the comment. I can't find the comment that came from. So if that's you, thank you for that comment, but I don't remember who did it. And I apologize for that. But anyway, so planned obsolescence, when I first encountered it, and the way that we're probably thinking about it was with this guy right here, which was an iPhone 3G. This was actually, it's technically like an iPhone 2, but it was the iPhone 3G. And what happened with this phone was one day I updated it, and after the update, it didn't work anymore. So the update made the phone run very slow. So slow, in fact, that when I would like swipe to like open up the phone to answer a phone call. This is so small now. People are like, that's such a mini phone. I'd swipe to open up the phone. It would stall out and I couldn't hear anyone, or the phone call would drop. It ceased its ability to do its core function, which was to make and receive phone calls. It also wasn't able to browse the internet well. Everything became laggy. Like just swiping between app screens became just a big lag fest, and the phone didn't work. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I guess I'll go back to a stupid phone so I can actually have a phone. And my mom ended up buying me a new phone because this one didn't work. She's like, well, you need a new phone. That one's old. You got to buy a new one. And therein lies the first big counterpoint, which is that if you are going to make a device, and this is from the comments on the channel, if you're going to make a device that people are going to want to buy a new one every so often anyway, it's actually a waste to make it durable. In other words, you don't want to put in a bunch of highly durable parts to something that people are going to buy a new one of after 2 years and throw the old one away. That's actually a waste of resources. So that's the big counterpoint that why like planned obsolescence is good. The thing is, that's not what most people are thinking of. They're thinking about what happened here. The phone worked on Tuesday. It stopped working on Wednesday because Apple decided to send a software update that way that made the phone run slower and would make you want to buy a new one. The phone worked on Tuesday. You put new software on it. It ceased working at the same capacity, and you're like, this phone's obsolete. And a lot of users basically fall for this. Like, my phone doesn't run good anymore. It's slow. I guess it's obsolete. I'll go buy a new one. So when people are talking about planned obsolescence, they're talking about my experience where the company decides that the phone should be obsolete and does a bunch of things which make that phone obsolete, which encourage you to buy new hardware. Now, the history of planned obsolescence actually goes way back. And you can look this up. In fact, I think there's a Veritaserum YouTube video that you can look up on how light bulb companies basically conspired to make their light bulbs worse about 100 years ago. Light bulbs lasted a long time. They decided we could sell more light bulbs if we made them not last as long. And so they re-engineered their light bulbs to be slightly worse so that people would buy light bulbs more often. Now, the disadvantage to this sort of cartel arrangement is that if you're the first person to break away and make your product good, then it puts you at a big advantage. The thing with light bulbs is that if you did that, it takes so long for people to realize your light bulbs last longer that you may not be in that best position. It's probably good to just keep your light bulbs functioning poorly. The other example is actually in cars. So if you think about automobiles in the first half of the 20th century, eventually you reach this point where most people had cars. People who were going to buy cars and they planned to keep them and use them for a long time. So how do you get people who already own cars to buy new cars? Well, you make the new cars better than the old cars. So you make the old cars obsolete by making the new cars better. Now, to me, that's not a bad thing. This is like possibly a good planned obsolescence, which is like, well, we'll make our new cars faster, more efficient, And this is how they really targeted this. We're going to make them look better and different every year. So every year, the model car looks different. It looks better. There's more colors. And so even if somebody owns an old car that's serviceable, they're going to want to buy the new car because it's more stylish. And the goal was really, can we get people to buy a new car every single year? That's what we would really like. But in the same vein, cars started to get better and better. And indeed, I really think cars today are better than cars of yore. I've been driving a car for a while now. My first car was an 86 Caprice Classic. And it was a piece of junk compared to even the next car I got, which was, I think, a 93 Ford Explorer. So just, less than 10 years of time there, the 93 Ford Explorer was like a way better car than the 86 Chevrolet. The 86 Chevrolet had a whole bunch of different little belts, and I remember if you hit the brakes too hard, you would kill the engine. And so there were many times where I would kill my engine coming up to a stoplight, have to restart the car, and possibly get the car off the road, open up the hood, and get out a wrench, and just maybe I had to slightly tighten, there was a belt on like the alternator, belt on this and that, so maybe slightly turn the alternator to loosen up the belt a little bit so that when you hit the brakes, the engine wouldn't die, because the engine would torque a little bit when you did different things. So I would fix that and then get back on the road, and then the belt would start going, whee! I've never had this problem on cars since. Now, I've had little serpentine belt issues on that 93 Explorer. The next car was a 2000. The next car was like a 2006. So I've been driving the same car, my 2006, for a long time now. And man, it's a great car. I can really see in those 20 years, the cars got unbelievably better. So my 2006 Chevrolet absolutely would make an 86 Chevy completely obsolete in terms of all the quality, reliability, and all that other kind of stuff. Yes, you can still drive an 86 Chevy, and it's a perfectly serviceable car. I know people who still drive their trucks from the 70s, and just keep them running and going. But they're not going to have all the features or the same amount of reliability that the newer cars are going to have. They, in fact, have planned to make the cars obsolete simply by making the models better. Now, most people really wouldn't object to that. In the computer hardware area, that's where we start to get a weird obsolescence cycle that I think most consumers start to become very keenly aware of, which is that as you come out with newer computer hardware, the people who make software, of course, are going to engineer the software to take advantage of that newer hardware. As hardware capabilities rise and rise, the efficiency of code starts to decrease and decrease, so that a program such as Microsoft Word, this is not a very big, serious, robust program. Microsoft Word doesn't have a seriously increased set of features from 2010. But running a new Microsoft Word, say on a Windows machine from 2005, you may have some problems with that. It's not going to run as fast as Word 2010, even though there's virtually no difference in the functionality of the programs. You start to get like just a massive bloat in the code. So that programs which had functionality on machines with a tiny fraction of the hardware capability 20 years ago and haven't really increased their feature set a whole lot, like such as Microsoft Word, are unable to run on those older machines. In essence, the software side of it has a relationship with the hardware side of it, so that obsolescence basically happens, that older machines start to become less and less usable because they're not able to run the newer software. And the newer software basically takes advantage of newer hardware to such an extent that the older hardware becomes obsolete through the software process. Now, this happens to a great extent with phones. And this is what really happened with my phone, is that all the software that runs on the phone starts to get more and more bloated, more and more complicated, bigger feature sets, fancier graphics, all that kind of stuff. And so it's not going to run on the older hardware anymore. The old hardware becomes obsolete because it's unable to run the software that people want to run on it. You're not playing Raid Shadow Legends on your iPhone 3G. You probably shouldn't be playing it at all, but that's not I really wish they would sponsor my videos. Wouldn't that be great? It's people like Raid Shadow Legends has really supported a lot of YouTube channels. I wish they would support mine. It's a great software program, and you should probably play it. And if you want to sponsor me, you can. So yeah, you're not playing like the new mobile games on your old iPhone 3G. However, when we look at the core function of a phone, of a smartphone's like, well, look at the internet. What are the functions of a smartphone? Make and receive phone calls, first of all. Receive and send text messages. In this case, be able to run some basic media like play music, watch videos, maybe look at the internet. So has all of that, YouTube now has higher resolution options, but the fact that YouTube probably is not going to run on this older piece of hardware kind of means that the software side of it has pushed it into obsolescence. That's something that happens automatically. So given that cycle, we go back to that argument for planned obsolescence. Given the cycle that the increasing specs of hardware are going to in turn influence increasing specs of software, which is going to make older hardware obsolete, it is actually wasteful to make very robust and very durable hardware for a device like this that will on its own become obsolete because of that cycle within a couple of years. I try to make my hardware last, at least on the mobile phone side of it, at least like 4 years. I try to get 4 years out of a phone before really thinking about it. I think my last phone, I got like 3.5 years out of it, which is pretty good for a phone before the speakers went out. Like the actual hardware started to die on it, not... it wasn't like it ceased being able to perform its core functions. Like the speakers died. It stopped. You had to like twist the phone to get the speakers to connect so you could actually hear a phone call. That's a durability issue with the phone. But if people are going to be replacing it, and let's say a large portion of the consumer base, like 90% of the consumer base, is just going to toss their phone after 3 years, it's kind of wasteful to put a bunch of durable parts into a phone, make a processor that's never going to lose efficiency, and make a battery that's never going to run out. And actually, I remember one of the first things, I'll tell you the first, because I got this out just to say this, the first time I had this conversation about it was actually with this thing. This is an iPhone, second generation, not iPhone, iPod. These are cool. This was a great piece of hardware when I got it. And I was complaining that all the batteries on these died. And so Apple, there was actually a class action lawsuit. Apple had to like give everybody a $100 gift card or something, or replace the battery for free. And I was talking to my friend Richard, Dick Woods, that's his name. But we called him Dick Woods. But Richard was like, "You're just gonna want a new one in a couple of years anyway. Nobody's gonna want to use their old iPod in 3 years." I'm like, "No, I want to use mine." I'm the exception. Most people were like, "Garbage. Give me a new one." Yeah, throw that. I have a newer one. Where'd I put it? I like to show hardware in the videos, and I have a new. Oh, here it is. Throw that one away. Get the new iPod. Throw that iPod away. I never throw away my hardware because I'm like, I could plug this into. If I had power to this, I could plug it into my home, like my car stereo, and it would work. And it still has like all my Judas Priest albums on it, right? So that's when I first realized that, like, yeah, they were gonna. Why would you make a battery that's going to last 5 years if everybody is going to be replacing their device in 4 years anyway? It would actually be wasteful. Now, here's my overall rebuttal to that, which is that most people, when they buy a phone, they have an idea of the core function remaining usable for a long period of time. Yeah, maybe the internet runs slower, maybe some web pages don't load well, maybe the battery doesn't hold up as well, but it should be able to make and receive phone calls. And the fact that my phone hardware hasn't been able to do that is a problem. Here's the other thing, which is companies, we're talking right to repair. I know some of you are into right to repair and know more about this than I do, of course, but many phone companies now are using many what I would call dirty tactics to stop consumers from repairing their hardware and getting more life out of their hardware. So if you have an iPhone and you take the screen breaks, or you need to replace the screen because it breaks, there's something, it's malfunctioning or it's broken. If you take that screen off and replace it with another iPhone screen from an iPhone, it won't work, because they link all the parts to one phone. So even though it's an iPhone screen from the same model, manufactured at the same place, maybe one off the line, it won't work because it's missing like some serial number identifier, and the phone will just not work with that new piece of hardware. In essence, you have to send the phone to Apple for them to repair it, in which case they probably are just going to send you a different phone, right? So that they basically they keep control of the repair operation, but more importantly, they stop you from being able to get longer life out of your hardware for less money and forcing you to buy newer Apple products. For whatever reason, and if you're somebody who likes Apple products, I'm sorry if this insults you, a lot of Apple users just tend to go along with this. My laptop's running slow, I guess I better buy a new one. My phone is like, this part's not working on it, I guess I better buy a new one. They just buy another Apple one, even though Apple has sent a software update to their phone to make it unusable. This is the kind of thing. Now, one of the ways that I got a lot of life out of my iPhone 5 is I was aware of this. So after, I think 18 months or 2 years, I stopped updating the phone completely. And I can plug that phone in and it still works. Everything on it works. The maps still work. Now, they're not completely up to date, right? The GPS on it still works, still makes and receives phone calls, makes and receives, sends and receives texts. It does all its core function and can browse the internet. None of that stuff is completely up to date. So some of the web pages are, if they use HTML5 or something, it's probably not going to run on the phone, but that's fine. The core function remains intact if I need that phone. And I've had to use that phone before. If I've had a phone break or something happens, I can put that SIM card into the phone and bam, it's going to work for me. That's something that I think is actually pretty cool. And I will actually say something good about Apple is that if I look at their products overall, I feel like their obsolescence is actually way better than other manufacturers. I have an iPad mini from I don't know how many years ago, and it still works. Its core function still works. It still can watch videos. It still can browse the internet. It still can play its basic games. It's very outdated, but it still works. The hardware still works. So I will say that overall, Apple makes their hardware very durable, even though I had a bad experience with my iPhone 3G where they sent out a software update that really was way too much for the hardware that was in those phones and made them basically unusable. And the crap thing is you couldn't downgrade. You couldn't go back to the older one without doing a whole bunch of work like jailbreaking your system and things like that to make the core phone usable again. So I will say that about Apple's, their obsolescence actually is quite a bit slower on their mobile devices than I think other manufacturers. But I think consumers, just to try to wrap up this video, I think consumers are right to view very skeptically planned obsolescence. The idea that a phone company is planning to make their phone obsolete to make you buy a new one by upping by sending out software updates that saddle down your phone. Apple got caught slowing down its phone processors in order to increase battery life. I think consumers are right to be very wary of that. This is not something that we want. When we buy hardware, we want it to last for a good long time. And really what it is people want their hardware to last 5 years for $800, and the manufacturers want to sell you a phone as often as possible, so they really don't care how long it lasts. As long as you're going to buy another phone from them, then it's okay for it to not last very long really at all. So that's one of the things that I think consumers are right to be aware of, especially in an inability to repair your hardware and keep it going for a long time. Now, I'm going to add one more point to this, which is the console, the home video game console, which is really outside of this software hardware obsolescence cycle. It's really far outside of it. Because what happens is you make the console, it has one set kind of hardware, everybody makes software for that hardware, one set of hardware. Then you have another generation. And even though we had this PS4 Pro, Xbox Series, whatever, Xbox One X, whatever it was, even though we had this mid-generation console happen last time, the idea of console generations makes it so that people are pretty confident when they buy a console, they have years worth of software library that they can buy for that console that is guaranteed to run at a certain level. That's the promise of the console. And indeed, all of my old consoles still work. My Nintendo DS had a hinge break and I repaired it and it still works. My original NES from that we got in 1988 still works. My Super Nintendo still works. My GameCube still works. My Genesis still works. My PS3 still works, right? My PS Vita still works. All of my old consoles, whether they're mobile or not, they still work years after the fact. Some cases 30 years down the line, the hardware is still working. And because that software hasn't shortcut the life of the usable hardware, like going back and trying to use a Macintosh computer from 1998 is going to be rather difficult because of the way computers work, because of that cycle. But using a PlayStation 1 from 1998, it still works, and all the software library still works on it. And that's actually something that I think is pretty cool. And in that case, you actually do want to make the hardware very durable, because when we buy a console, especially now that we have retro consoles and things like that, the expectation is that this console hardware is going to last a really long time. It's going to last at least a decade. I should be able to play this console for 10 or more years and be able to really get a lot of use out of it, and be able to play it maybe 20 years from now, and still be able to play my software library of games. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad expectation, and it's really good that they made hardware back in the day that durable. At the same time, you know, the counterpoint is that if people are going to replace it, there's not a lot of point to making all the parts durable. Or, you know, if you imagine the refrigerator becoming obsolete, there's no point in making the hinge last 1,000 years if the compressor only lasts 10. If the compressor lasts 10 years, you should really just engineer the whole thing to last 10 years. There's not really a big reason to over-engineer all the little parts, because why would you? When the compressor's out, that's the main part of the refrigerator. You really should buy a new refrigerator at that point. So yeah, why would you make your hinges last 10 years if your compressor only lasts that long? So when you engineer a product to last a certain amount of time, it should last as long as the most expensive part of it really is, the main part of it. So if an engine is really only going to last 500,000 miles, you don't need to engineer the doors to be able to be opened and closed 7 trillion times and make the hinges so robust that they'll never break. That being said, there are people who change the engine out on their car after 500,000 miles and continue driving it, because, you know, that main part, once you replace it, turns out all the other parts are pretty well engineered in a lot of cases. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below. This is a longer video, I guess. In general, I'm very wary of companies now because of the idea of planned obsolescence. You don't want them to send an update to your phone. And I turn off updates after 2 years. So I usually do 2 years on a phone, and then I turn off updates, because you know that if you're really wanting to put the newest version of Android on there, it's going to slow your phone down. Your phone's going to start to lag, and then you're going to lose the core function of your phone. At the same time, it's good to view your phone, let's say, as a core function device and not something that you are intending to run all kinds of software on for a long time. And if you are intending to run all kinds of software on it for a long time, well, you're going to end up in that software hardware obsolescence cycle. And it seems to be pretty fast with mobile phones, not as fast as, say, desktop computers. My desktop computer is like 6 years old. It still runs pretty much everything perfectly. And my last desktop computer I built over 10 years ago, like 13 years ago, and it still works if I want it to work. So that's actually pretty cool. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for leaving your thoughts down below, and I will see you next time.